Do you know the rules of the hospital? Not the official regulations. Not the ones written on signs or posted notices, but the real rules. You don't? Then you're fortunate. But now that you're about to hear this story, you too will know the rules. And once you know them, you can never forget. My name is Eric Martin. I'm a 31-year-old former doctor. 3 months ago, I broke all 5 of the hospital's rules to save my wife and son. This is the result. Every night outside my window appears an old man with a scythe, still wearing hospital scrubs, showing his teeth in a grin, approaching us step by step. He is the Grim Reaper, and he's come to complete the contract. If you ever visit a hospital in the middle of the night, remember what I'm about to tell you, especially when you see the number 4 on the elevator buttons. Never, ever press it. Now, it all began 3 months ago on that stormy night. The night I first worked the night shift at Holbrook Memorial Hospital. If you listen to this story to the end, you too will become part of the hospital system. But you need to know, or someday you might become the victim yourself. So listen, and remember, the story of the price I paid to save lives. Rain was beating hard against my windshield. Through the brief clarity created by the wipers, the outline of Holbrook Memorial Hospital appeared and vanished. A sterile building made of concrete and smoked glass. It looked more like a prison than a hospital. Eric Martin. That's my name. A 31-year-old doctor who was starting night shifts tonight. My wife Emily was 8 months pregnant. She had a high-risk pregnancy requiring bed rest, and we needed the extra income to support her. So I accepted the night shift conditions. Before leaving, Emily tried to reassure me. "It'll be fine," she said. "It's a new hospital, so it probably won't be too busy." Before getting out of the car, I looked up at the building. Most floors were brightly lit, but one floor was completely shrouded in darkness. The 4th floor, like a black hole in the building. Lightning split the sky, followed by low thunder. At the time, I thought it was just a power outage. I never imagined that floor was the realm of the dead. The moment the hospital's automatic doors opened, I felt something was wrong. The emergency room was completely empty. Despite it being 7 p.m., there were no machine beeps, no footsteps, no conversations. A silence as if sound had vanished from the world. I called out, but there was no response. I headed to the triage area and checked the 5 examination rooms. All empty, only curtains swaying slightly, with no sign of human presence. When I called out again, a curtain in the adjacent room suddenly billowed, as if someone inside was pushing against it. A human silhouette appeared through the fabric, mouth wide open in a scream, both hands desperately reaching out. I jumped back. My heart leaped to my throat.
Dar Martin, right?
The curtain was pushed open, and a young nurse appeared. Her name tag read Amy. She wore a bright smile, but somehow it seemed unnatural. Her eyes weren't smiling. I tried to ask about the strange curtain behavior, but she just tilted her head. She explained that everyone was on break, preparing for the night rush. Night rush?
No one comes at this hour. But after midnight, it gets busy. When the patients come.
There was something strange in the way she said patience, as if it contained another meaning. After Amy left, I stood there alone. The surrounding silence rang in my ears like tinnitus. This was the first rule. Silence during the day. They come after midnight. But at that time, I still didn't know who they were. The first few hours were peaceful. After handling one simple suturing case, the hospital silence seemed to deepen. Around 10 p.m. during my dinner break, I decided to look for a vending machine. It was ironic that while I recommended healthy eating to patients, I, as a doctor, craved junk food. I desperately wanted cola and potato chips. Once I left the triage area, the hospital became even quieter. Only my footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor. The nurse's station at the end of the hallway was completely unmanned, computer screens pitch black. I was about to turn back and give up when I saw her. A young woman was stumbling toward me from the other end of the hallway. Her face was waxy white. Long hair stuck to her face with sweat. She held both hands to her abdomen, walking while crying out in pain. I rushed to her and asked if she was okay. She wouldn't look at me, only muttering that it hurt. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I supported her arm and headed toward the emergency room. But questions swirled in my mind. Where had she come from? She wore no hospital gown or ID bracelet. I couldn't have missed the emergency entrance, so how had she gotten so deep inside? There was no time to think. The woman's hand slipped from mine, and she collapsed to the floor, crying out in pain while clutching her abdomen. I found an unused stretcher and quickly transported her to the triage area. I laid her on the bed and asked the necessary questions. Her name was Haley Johnson, 24 years old. She had severe abdominal pain, describing it as stabbing pain on the right side, likely appendicitis or ectopic pregnancy. I ordered an ultrasound and surgery preparation, but as I was about to leave the room, Dr. Harris came running down the hallway.
Martin, I told you all surgical orders require my approval. I apologized, but his next words stunned me. Cancel the surgery. I don't approve it.
But she'll die,
Don't raise your voice.
Dr. Harris said in a low tone. That whispered voice was far more terrifying than any shout.
She doesn't need surgery. There's nothing wrong with her. If you don't believe me, check the ultrasound.
Dr. Harris said in a low tone. That whispered voice was far more terrifying than any shout.
She doesn't need surgery. There's nothing wrong with her. If you don't believe me, check the ultrasound.
Then he turned and walked away. The nurses pretended not to hear our conversation, working busily. I was confused but worried about Haley. I had to examine her. When ultrasound technician Sarah saw me, she showed obvious confusion. She said coldly that my time was valuable too and demanded to know what the examination was for. When I answered it was to investigate abdominal pain, Sarah shook her head.
You know what she is, don't you? Everyone knows. It's a waste of time.
What she is. Didn't she mean what she's suffering from? When Sarah refused to do the examination, I offered to do it myself. She shrugged and left the room, leaving the equipment behind. I had only done ultrasounds a few times in medical school. After struggling with the controls, I finally got the machine working. Haley was semi-conscious, writhing in pain on the small bed. I applied gel to her abdomen and placed the probe. Black and white images appeared on screen, shapes changing as I moved the probe. While searching for the right position, a strange white object appeared in the center of the screen, something sharp and brightly glowing. What on earth was this? Puzzled, I looked up and my eyes caught the reflection in the window. In that instant, all air left my lungs. In the reflection, Haley's clothes were soaked in blood. A knife handle protruded from her abdomen, reflecting the fluorescent light. Her eyes rolled back in pain, her mouth wide open in a silent scream, and her gaze was looking straight at me. I jumped from my chair. The probe clattered to the floor. My heart raced in my chest. The room spun. Wind roared in my ears. But when I looked back at the bed, Haley was as before, semi-conscious and moaning, but no blood, no knife. I ran from the room calling for help, summoning nurses and other doctors. But when I brought them back, Haley was gone. She had been unable to walk. So where had she gone? When I desperately tried to explain the situation, Amy asked for the patient's name, Haley Johnson. The moment I spoke that name, the air in the room changed, as if an invisible wall had formed between me and everyone else. Amy's eyes widened and she hurried away. The other doctor shook his head and left the room. I was left alone in the empty examination room. This was the second rule. Truth appears in reflections. Look in mirrors and windows. There you can see everything. But at the time, I still didn't understand what Haley was. Still confused, I went to the computer at the nurse's station. I had to check the records to see where Haley had been transferred. What I saw on the screen made my blood freeze. Haley Johnson, 24 years old, stabbed by boyfriend with hunting knife, brought to her. Admission date, October 15, 2021. 4 years ago, I considered various possibilities. Different person with same name, mishearing, input error. I searched various name combinations but found no matching records. My eyes grew tired, my head foggy. I must have been hallucinating. Fatigue and stress from the new environment. But when I looked at the file again, I noticed a small arrow at the bottom of the screen. Clicking it opened page 2. Only one line was written there. Transferred to 4th floor. No transfer date or time listed. Was it 4 years ago or now? But maybe I could still help her. I stood up and headed for the elevator. The moment the elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, I knew it was wrong. Ahead was complete darkness. Only the light from the elevator created a thin band of light in the darkness. I called out but got no response. This was the dark floor I'd seen from outside. Maybe there was a power outage. The file record must be wrong. I tried to close the doors by pressing the button, but nothing happened. I pressed again, and with a buzzing sound, the elevator lights went out. Complete darkness. My muscles froze. No light came from anywhere. Even the emergency exit signs weren't lit. And no sound, no air conditioning, no distant machine sounds, nothing. With trembling hands, I took out my phone and used it as a flashlight. The thin light illuminated a long hallway. I could see doors lining both sides. If this floor had the same layout as others, the stairs should be at the far end of the hallway. Walking alone down a dark corridor was terrifying, but I had no choice. As I began walking, I noticed something strange. This floor looked like it had been used recently. A stretcher sat in front of room 12, and hospital scrubs lay on the floor, stained with dark spots. Surgical instrument trays were placed in the hallway, scalpels and forceps reflecting the light, as if the people working had suddenly vanished, leaving everything behind. But as I continued walking, I noticed some doors were open. I stopped, blood freezing. Just walk past, I told myself. The first door was only slightly open, but blue light leaked from inside, like a TV was on, even though there was no electricity. As I passed, I thought I heard canned laughter. The second door was completely dark. As I approached, I heard faint moaning from inside. Maybe it was Haley. Maybe she needed help. I stopped in front of the door and shined my phone's light inside. It was a small room. A folding table in the corner, a dirty bed in the center, and white curtains hung from the ceiling, dividing the room in half. When I called out, the moaning came again, from behind the curtain. Haley. Then the curtain rippled. Something sharp, like fingers, slowly slid across the fabric. The curtain bulged as something pressed against it. I could see a human shape, the outline of a wide open mouth. I turned and ran. past other rooms. From one came radio static, from another insane whispering in an incomprehensible language. The same syllables repeated over and over. Another room had bright flashing lights, half hidden in shadows. I kept running, slipping on my feet. I could see the end of the hallway, the stairway door, but there was one problem. Between me and the stairs, a door was creaking open and closed. I fixed my eyes forward and sprinted, trying not to look at the open rooms, but I saw it in my peripheral vision. Someone standing inside a room, a step or two in from the door. An old man in faded, dirty hospital scrubs, long gray hair and sunken, pale skin. As I passed, he didn't move, completely still. But the moment I passed, I heard the distinct sound of bare feet slapping linoleum. I lunged at the stairway door. The footsteps grew louder behind me. Then his hand grabbed my wrist. I screamed. I tried to shake my hand free, but his fingers dug in like a vice. My joints creaked. Pain shot up my arm. He stared at me with icy blue eyes and grinned, showing yellowed teeth. I pulled with all my strength and finally broke free. I opened the stairway door and dove inside, racing down the stairs. When I opened the first floor door, a wave of relief washed over me. Color and light, all kinds of sounds, conversation, machine beeps, footsteps. I stumbled to a nearby chair and sat down. My heart was still pounding violently. This was the third rule. The fourth floor belongs to the dead. The living must not enter. But at the time, I still didn't know why it was the realm of the dead, or what the dead were seeking. When Dr. Harris found me, his anger was tremendous. He demanded to know where I'd been. And when I answered I was looking for Haley on the fourth floor, dark fury filled his eyes.
You disobeyed my orders. You'll pay the price.
Then he walked away. As I sat there, I noticed things around me becoming hectic. Nurses, doctors, patients being wheeled in on stretchers. The night rush Amy had mentioned was beginning. I stood up and headed to triage to see how I could help. On the way, I passed through the waiting room. The room that had been empty before was now packed with people. But as I passed, I saw something terrifying in my peripheral vision. An old woman leaning forward in her chair, with black holes for eyes. A woman scratching at the wall with her nails, mouth wide open in a soundless scream. A middle-aged man lying on the floor, sobbing while his whole body shook. I stopped and looked back at the room. Then everything appeared normal. The old woman sat quietly in her chair, blowing her nose with a tissue. The woman walked calmly around the room. The man stared at his phone. What was happening? My whole body began to shake. I forced myself to keep walking. I was very tired. It had been a long time since I'd stayed up all night. I must be hallucinating. I entered the first triage room where there was a woman from a minor car accident. I admitted her for concussion. The next room had an elderly man showing heart attack symptoms. I transferred him to a specialist. But as I made rounds to each room, I began to notice something strange. The patients would look different for just a moment. When seen in my peripheral vision, they appeared injured, bloody, in agony. But when I looked directly, they were ordinary people with minor symptoms. This was the fourth rule. Don't look directly at what you see in your peripheral vision. Pretend not to see. Otherwise, you'll see the truth. But I still didn't understand what that truth was. Around 2 a.m., my pager went off. I was needed in room 5. Exhausted, I headed to the room, and the moment I opened the door, the world stopped. Emily, my wife, was there, lying in bed, moaning in pain while clutching her abdomen. Her face was wet with sweat, tears streaming down her cheeks. Between contractions, she weakly explained. She had been fine, then sudden severe labor pains began. At first there was nothing, then unbearable pain struck. Dr. Harris's words echoed in my mind.
You'll pay the price.
This wasn't coincidence. But was such a thing possible? That he had used supernatural power to put my wife into premature labor? A nurse entered and explained the situation. Emergency C-section needed, blood pressure at dangerous levels, preeclampsia, surgery immediately or her life was at risk. She didn't need to continue. I knew. She was going to die. The transport to the operating room was rushed. The obstetrician arrived. Blue screens were set up, masked and capped. I held Emily's hand. "It's going to be okay," I whispered to her.
I'm scared.
She answered in a trembling voice. The surgery was swift. Within minutes, a newborn's cry filled the room. When my son was placed in my arms, looking down at his perfect little face filled my heart. When I held one of his tiny fists, his hand opened and grasped my finger. Our son, mine and Emily's. The nurse carefully took him from my arms and carried him to the scale. I watched with tears in my eyes. I was so absorbed with my son that I barely noticed Dr. Harris entering. Then I heard his voice behind me, low and quiet.
Transfer her to the 4th floor.
My heart stopped. Dr. Harris pushed me aside and grabbed both ends of the stretcher. Before I could stop him, he was wheeling Emily out of the room. I chased after them, shouting, but noticed how pale Emily's skin looked. Grayish. Her eyes were open, but she didn't blink or move. Just stared at the ceiling, not focusing on anything. No. I slipped into the elevator just before the doors closed. The elevator shuddered as it rose to the 4th floor. When I protested to Dr. Harris, he calmly began explaining.
Dr. Martin, life must be paid for with life. That's the natural order. There's a man in cardiac arrest in room 4. He's going to die, unless someone else dies in his place.
When I asked if he intended to kill my wife, he grinned.
That man is very wealthy. He can pay enormous sums. Running this hospital isn't cheap. Besides, you actively defied my orders.
When I protested, he revealed an even more horrifying truth.
I've done this hundreds of times before. To people like Haley Johnson. The dead sometimes become restless and return here after midnight, wandering the halls, waiting in the emergency room, seeking revenge, salvation, something. We're just sending them back to their resting place.
The elevator chimed and the doors opened.
Ah, we've arrived,
Dr. Harris said quietly. The 4th floor was no longer dark. Ceiling fluorescent lights flickered irregularly, creating an eerie strobe effect in the ruined ward. All the doors were open, and in each room, someone sat on hospital beds. But they weren't injured. No pain or suffering. Quietly sleeping, reading, staring at the blue light of invisible TVs. In the room closest to the elevator, I saw a familiar woman, Haley Johnson. She sat quietly on the bed, looking at us. No knife in her abdomen anymore. Just peaceful, as if awakening from a long sleep. As Dr. Harris began pushing the stretcher out of the elevator, he muttered one word.
It's time.
Then I saw a figure at the other end of the hallway. My heart leaped to my throat. It was that old man, the one who had grabbed my wrist on the 4th floor. He was slowly walking down the dark hallway, smiling. In his hand was a long curved blade, a scythe, gleaming dully in the flickering light. His disheveled gray hair hung over his face, creating deep shadows on his sunken skin. His gaunt face looked like a skull in the dim light, eye sockets like endless black holes. He was death itself. I grabbed Dr. Harris's shoulder and threw him to the ground. Before he could get up, I pulled the stretcher back into the elevator. I frantically pressed the door close button, so hard my knuckles might crack. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a high-pitched grinding sound, the doors began to close. Dr. Harris got up, his face twisted with rage.
She has to go. There's a contract.
No, absolutely not. I threw myself over Emily, praying the doors would close completely. The doors closed and the elevator began descending. When the doors opened on the first floor, I wheeled Emily out. Her eyes trembled for a moment and focused on me.
Where am I?
She asked in confusion. You're safe now. You're alive. That's enough. This was the final and most important rule. When death comes demanding payment, run. Don't make deals. To protect those you love, break every rule. We moved to a small house in the countryside, hundreds of miles from Holbrook Memorial Hospital. Our son David is growing up healthy. Being woken up at night is hard, but seeing his smile every morning makes me grateful that all three of us are alive. Emily has recovered completely and remembers almost nothing of that night. She sometimes says she had bad dreams. Dreams of being in a very dark, cold place. I say nothing. It's better she doesn't remember, but I can't forget. Every night before bed, I check all the doors and windows of the house. I close the curtains and peer outside, and sometimes I see a figure beyond the hills. At first he was far away, just a tiny dot, but as nights pass he gets a little closer. Last night I could see him clearly, an old man in hospital scrubs standing on the hillside, long gray hair blowing in the wind, scythe in hand, and he was smiling. I broke the hospital rules. I invaded the realm of the dead, refused to deal with death, and stole the designated sacrifice. So he's coming to complete the contract. Emily and David are sleeping, peacefully, knowing nothing. I must protect them, even if it costs me my life. Looking out the window, the old man has taken another step closer. Tomorrow night, he'll be closer still, and the next night too. Someday he'll reach the house, and then the final reckoning will come. But I have no regrets. To save those I love, I would do the same thing again. Now you've heard this story to the end. That means you too know the hospital rules. Once you know them, you can never forget. Rule 1. Suspect the silent hours. If a hospital is too quiet during the day, beware. They come after midnight. Rule 2. See truth in reflections. What's reflected in mirrors and windows is reality. What you see directly might be illusion. Rule 3. The fourth floor belongs to the dead. The living must never set foot there. It's their resting place. Rule 4. Don't look directly at your peripheral vision. Accept what you see as it is. If you see too much truth, you can't go back. Rule 5. Refuse deals with death to protect those you love. Break every rule if you must. Remember these rules. Someday when you visit a hospital, they'll surely help, especially when you wake up in the middle of the night and see a figure at the end of the hallway, when you see the 4 button glowing on the elevator, when you notice something other than yourself in a mirror, and if an old man in hospital scrubs with a scythe smiles at you. Run with everything you have. But remember, once you know the rules, you're part of the system. The hospital never lets its patients go, like me, and now, like you. Look out your window. Do you see something beyond the hills? A figure slowly but surely approaching. If you feel the urge to tell someone this story, that's part of the rules too. Knowledge must spread. Warnings must be passed on. But each time you tell it, you make the hospital more powerful. More people know the rules. More souls are incorporated into the system. As I did, as you're doing now. And the old man on the hill deepens his smile each time a new soul joins. He's very patient. Death doesn't hurry. Someday, you too will meet him. Until then, remember the rules. And don't forget to check outside your window before you sleep. The hospital never sleeps.